Greetings and salutations, everyone. Happy afternoon, assuming you are in some time zone near to me. It is your afternoon. Otherwise, happy day, night, evening, whenever, wherever you are in or around the globe or on some other globe, catching this through some kind of alien technology, through wormholes and through the vastness of space. I say welcome. How are you? I'm fine. I'm good. If you missed it yesterday, again, if you are watching or listening to this in some kind of chronological order, I had an awesome interview with Brandon from Wet Ink Games. That was great, and it was served as a nice interlude to get behind the scenes of No Man's Land, which we'll be talking about today and some of their other projects. If you missed that, go ahead and check it out. It's as I record this, it is obviously up on YouTube and other places where I stream. I am working on the audio version, so this won't make any sense in the future, but look for it soon on your podcast platforms. Check it out. But today I am back to continue through No Man's Land. We left off, and you can go back to part 1 of this to check out the rest of it. Going through, in that case, we covered, or in that stream, we covered most of, if not all of the mechanics, at least in some detail, basically going in page order through the book. So some of the we got into a lot of the mechanics, some of the character generation stuff, some of the background info. We left off about to look at No Man's Land. So that is where I will start things off. I don't have any programming notes other than tomorrow will be the last stream of the week since I'll be taking Friday off for New Year's Eve. Probably will do another OSR Reddit roundup to just keep that going. That's it for programming notes. As they say, let's get on with the show. No Man's Land. First up, we have a quote from Wilfred Owen, the soldier and poet who unfortunately did not make it out of the Great War. Wonderful poetry. Maybe the best example, I think, of, in my very humble, non-academic opinion, of kind of the art and poetry that was produced in and during the war. But there's a quote from him about No Man's Land. No Man's Land is like the face of the moon, chaotic, crater-ridden, uninhabitable, awful, the abode of madness. And he wrote that sometime he ended up dying, I forget during which offensive, in 1918. At the words trench warfare, the mind often conjures images of a long, deeply dug trench stretching for miles as far as the eye can see. While this is true, it's only part of the story. The trenches for both the Allied powers and the Central powers were more than just one lengthy line that stretched on forever. Each side fighting on the Western Front had a vast network of trenches through which they moved soldiers, artillery, and supplies. There were trenches for reserve fighters and those for active combat. Rather than a single line, the trenches looked more like a web, a sprawling manufactured system of protection, transport, and respite. In between, the land that stretched from the Allied powers' trenches to those of the Central powers was aptly named No Man's Land. No Man's Land was the land that neither the Allied powers nor the Central powers could claim as their own ground. It was occupied only by abandoned military equipment and death. The space between the trench lines could stretch as far as a few hundred yards or meters, but in some areas, the trenches between the opposing armies were much closer. The terrain between the trenches was pockmarked with shell craters and riddled with the bodies of fallen soldiers and animals. It was poisoned from the use of arsenic, chlorine gas, and other chemical weapons. It was a trap of twisted barbed wire and landmines, where one was under constant threat of machine gun fire from the enemy. Though it was a deadly place, soldiers did have to venture into No Man's Land on occasion, during an attempt to gain ground, for example, or afterwards to retrieve the dead or wounded. The fear and dread that surrounded venturing over the top, as veterans have described coming out of the trench into No Man's Land, was palpable. As Harry Patch, the longest surviving veteran of the trenches, commented, "If any man tells you he went over the top and he wasn't scared, he's a damn liar." Tragically, because of the fear, and, quite honestly, the logistics involved, not every wounded soldier was retrieved, and many met a gruesome end in the mud as they waited for their comrades to take them on a stretcher to safety. Even 100 years after the fact, remains are still being uncovered from these areas, where thousands gave up their lives to gain a few yards on the enemy. Next, we have a telegram from Army Archive dated July 13th, 1960 to William Robertson, London. Plans have changed. Stop. We have discovered a new power that will help us win the war. Stop. Flash of light was not gas, it was their arrival. Stop. Germans found the meaning of the text first, but soon everyone will know. Stop. We will remain at Longueval. Stop. All right, so there we got some real history and then the tie-in with the fictional history of the game, basically, that during these horrible offensives, the veil was rent and different agents or their influences seeping into our world. A little sip of tea for the working man. And now the different allied and I was going to say allied and Axis, the was it the central and the what are the two forces? Allied and the central powers, of course, want to jockey for who is going to control this new power source and make it work for them. Of course, this assumption that it can be controlled. Next up, we have a section on the Allied powers, the Entente Alliance, the Third French Republic. Maybe I'm going to skip over some of this because it's good background, but I'm not sure if maybe I'll look at basically, I think the important part of this for our purposes is less about the history, which is good. But let's to keep it on point. Let's see what they talk about, how France reacts or not to the tearing of the veil. Once the veil was torn, little changed in French attitudes or military procedure. Everyone knew from the beginning what a horrible slog a war is, and monsters getting involved didn't change that. France's resolve to fight, whether that means Germany or the corrupted. The undead are a constant threat, which require a bit of extra planning, just like chlorine gas is a constant threat. Whispers are just another battlefield innovation useful in the grim task of forcing an end to the conflict. And this is interesting. So they have these underlined, I don't know, almost like bullet points of things about, I guess they're going to have this for each one of the powers. So we have themes, officer attitudes, and soldier attitudes. So this is really good because this gets into the kind of on-the-ground stuff. In your game, you're going to have either you're playing as the French, or you're going to run into French forces. These are the kind of things you could think about when dealing with the French NPCs or whatnot in the game. First we have up is themes. Themes for the French are personal honor, the small comforts, tragic circumstances. Officer attitudes says, this generation of officers has been preparing all their careers to fight Germany and redeem the national honor lost in the last war. They are determined not to lose again, typo there, and they will do almost anything to inspire their soldiers to hold their lines and fight to the last. And then the attitude of the soldiers. French soldiers are relaxed and somewhat fatalistic. 3 years of military service is compulsory, so the army contains every sort of French person. Most hope simply to survive their tour, from building trenches to burying bodies to facing down shambling shapes in the darkness. War is an unpleasant business. If one must go do something unpleasant, it is best to just get it done as directly and thoroughly as possible. Can I highlight this? I don't think I have my, whoops. I'll have to remember that because I can't highlight here. I always feel like I want to note those typos I find so I can pass them on. We have some entries in Alfred's journal. Dated July 14, 1916. Everything fell apart that first day here on the Somme. Whatever that light was, it brought with it a great darkness and enemies worse than the Kaiser's men. We wouldn't have meddled in the dark arts like they seem to have done. At least I hope we wouldn't. But I wonder. It has taken our commanders as well, whatever it is. We hear rumors pass through the trenches, spreading like fire, sacrifices, mutilations, self-harm, blood magic. A new order has taken control of the military. We follow those who delve into the occult. It doesn't make sense to me. Why not? Thomas asks me. We kept hearing them talk about a new weapon to help with the war, something far better than gas. I'm not convinced. This isn't better than gas. It's worse. They're ripping men apart, William says. Hush up, John says, ever stoic. You don't know who is listening. There are men in the trenches and in the field from here to Longueval. The word has spread all the way from that small haven to the front in a few short weeks. Something is happening in Longueval that terrifies the men. But the occult? Have we employed druids and warlocks to help us win? I don't think the army would stand for it. Then I remember the marks we found in the dugout before Bailey disappeared again. I'm scared. What if they've doomed us all? And then from July 15th, 1916, Officer Bailey is back. This time there's no question in my mind that he has become a dead thing. The flies never leave him. He tells us to march as we're leaving the front. This would normally bring joy to any soldier, but this time we know that no matter where we are in the vast network of trenches, we aren't safe from the thing that has taken hold of our officers. As we march through the mud, we see evidence of the secret things our officers have been doing these last weeks. Etchings in the mud of trenches, strange arcane symbols of some unholy power, like the ones we found in Bailey's dugout. Bones piled upon bones, brutally ugly monuments to the dead made out of the dead themselves. I shudder as we pass a tower of limbs crowned with a skull and ragged wire, and can't help but wonder if these men died before they were torn apart or after. Were they allies or enemies? And then finally from July 16th, 1916, the nights are quiet, filled with the same quiet that we sensed before the Great Flash. I am afraid. I really like these. I really like these letters. Really great scene setters. Brutally ugly monuments to the dead made out of the dead themselves. Come on. How can that not send a tingle down your spine? We get to the British Empire. And like with the French, I am going to skip to how they are responding to the rending of the veil. Though the full details remain sealed by royal decree, it is widely accepted the British were early adopters of whispers for the war effort. Despite resistance from some officers, the military authorized arcane research units within weeks of the tragedy at the Somme. In the climate of those days, finding out exactly what caused the explosion and how to control that power were given top priority. The application of this early British experimentation eventually produced some of the war's most horrible devices. For themes, we have duty, heroic sacrifice, and weaponization of every possible advantage. The officer attitudes of the British are: loyalty is an important quality for the officer corps. They consider anyone unwilling to fight to the last a traitor. The majority of officers are so dependent on the chain of command they trust information and orders from command more than what they see on the ground. That's a really important bit. And then for soldier attitudes, it says, British soldiers tend to believe that they must fight for king and country when called upon to do so. Raised on heroic stories of British soldiers fighting to establish colonial control of the far-flung empire, many see the war as their own opportunity to do their part for the empire. Morale is generally high among British troops. And we get one or more telegrams. Here's the first one. Dated July 17, 1916, to Douglas Haig in Longueval. Are you mad? Stop. The Germans have been brought to their knees by these things. Stop. March out and finish them. Stop. We don't need this blood magic to win. Stop. Send your sorcerers home. Stop. Ooh, your sorcerers. And then this was another one dated July 17th, 1916, to William Robertson in London. You must come and see for yourself. Stop. Kitchener refused to listen, but maybe Lloyd George will. Stop. We must convince him and Asquith. Stop. Come to Longueval and we will summon them so you can see for yourself. Stop. Ooh. Wonder what they're going to summon. Now we get to the Russian Empire. The politicians rushed into the power vacuum, proclaiming a republic and attempting to set up a stable government. The soldiers, well aware that being sent to the front was essentially a death sentence, would only support whomever promised to keep them garrisoned in the cities and end the war. While defeats continued, political tensions eventually led to the seizure of power by the communists in November 1917. They concluded a separate peace with the Central Powers, and Russia left the war the following January. So they didn't have kind of a bit about how they respond to the veil, since they're basically out of the war. So I just read the last paragraph. So apologies if it came off a little bit abrupt, but basically it was the moments before that was, the Tsar abdicated in March 1917, and then politicians rushed to fill the power vacuum, and then so on with the rest of that paragraph. Themes are desperate conditions, political turmoil, determination against impossible odds. The officer attitudes. Most Russian officers are part of the Russian nobility and support the Tsarist status quo. Many of the top Russian generals are, in fact, uncles of the Tsar. Thus, both honor and familial duty are part of serving in the army. More than once, officers trying to resign in shame after losing a battle have had their resignations refused, as there is no one else to take over their command. And then of the soldier attitudes, by and large, soldiers are drawn from the poorest classes of Russia's urban and rural poor. They have only a nebulous loyalty to their little father, the Tsar, and once the progress of the war became clear, they have no desire to throw themselves in front of enemy machine guns merely for patriotism. The role desperate and unhappy soldiers have on the spread of corruption and on the accompanying political chaos cannot be overstated. Copy of a letter to Mary Warbeck, collected from Mary in spring 1917. July 8th, 1916. Mary, you and Mother will be worrying over me, but I assure you I'm fine. I survived the fighting on the Somme. The offensive that was supposed to win back the Allies' territory in France didn't go as planned, and there has been no fighting since the start of July. Something is happening, Mary. I don't know if the war will end soon or not, but believe me when I say I don't believe the Germans are the enemy any longer. I don't want to frighten you, but know the ravings of Charlotte's husband don't sound too insane. Stay calm. Don't tell anyone what I've told you. I'll write again as soon as I can. All my love, Alfred. And now we get a little section on Italy. The whole of Italy's involvement in the war took place on Italy's immediate borders. Ooh, there's another typo. Garrisoning the Alps in the north and pushing into Austrian territory in the northwest. Battles included the Asiago campaign and a series of major battles on the Isonzo River between 1915 and 1918. Perhaps because of their limited area of deployment, Italian soldiers tend to deny they saw anything strange during the war. Themes are territorial ambition, reclaiming past glories, earning respect. Officer attitudes. Many officers are relatively untested in war. There are any number of famous Italian commanders from history, but all the wars in living memory have been small conflicts. Despite this, with national pride on the line, they are determined to use as many troops as it takes to accomplish their mission. And then soldier attitudes. From the beginning of the conflict, the average soldier has been eager to gain glory in the conquest of territory. Thousands of soldiers have willingly thrown themselves into the desperate conditions of mountain fighting so that Italy can claim a victory. Most Italians have less interest in the greater progress of the war, focused on battles on Italy's own borders. And we get some more of Alfred's journal, which to me is the fun stuff of this section. First, dated July 20th, 1916. We march. We pick up anything we find that's of use. Munitions, coats, tins, cigarettes. We find dogs and horses, abandoned or escaped, and take them too. We put masks on them if we have them to spare. The horses make carrying our growing stockpile of supplies easier to move. The dogs keep away the rats. But nothing keeps away the flies. The mud is oppressive. I am dead tired by the end of the day, having spent mile after mile pulling my boots from the ground's clutches. Everything stinks. I wear my mask most of the time now to keep from smelling the stench around me. When we finally break free of the trenches, crossing the open ground doesn't offer much relief. There is not a shrub or a tree or a blade of grass in sight. Everywhere I look there is mud and wire and shells and the leftovers of battle. Bailey doesn't say where he is taking us. We silently follow, but I fear mutiny is brewing. A letter from Mary came today, so this gives me hope that the army still functions from outside the front. How they found me, I'm not sure. Someone must still be communicating our movements to the general. And then from July 22nd, 1916. We come to Longueval, rather what is left of Longueval. The main street is a dirt road between piles of rubble. When we first arrive, there are other troops mulling about, picking through the piles. Bailey meets in a bombed-out building with the other officers. When he comes back, he tells us to set up for the night. This is where we'll stay until further notice. Bailey comes around, half-heartedly checking munitions, passing out rations, ordering when we'll rest and when we'll keep watch. The flies follow him wherever he goes. What kind of magic keeps him alive? William hisses as soon as he's gone. He's not dead, Thomas answered. He's sick. We all look up at a grunt from John. He's not sick, the old soldier says. He's caught whatever madness is taking control of the army. I shudder. When I close my eyes, I can see a future where we fight one another instead of the Germans. Will this all end with men trying to remain men against the darkness? John is getting ready for something. The other men look to him now. Whatever he has planned, they'll follow. Oh, these are good. These are good. Now we get the good old USA. 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 All right. Let's see. Where do we get? I'm trying to see what stuff is most related to the game with the veil. Let's see. Where are we going here? Interestingly, in addition, let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, here we go. There's actually a lot here. As for the unusual occurrences, at first the U.S. troops were armored by disbelief. That, however, has run its course, and they are becoming just as haunted, some would say just as tainted, as the other military forces. However, they are taking things in an extremely practical manner. American troops appear to be encouraged to speak bluntly and plainly about what they've seen, and new troops arriving at a staggering 10,000 per day are instructed to believe your own eyes and report what you've seen, no matter how crazy it sounds. Little swig of tea here. Let's see. I've lost my spot. Oh, there we go. This has led to a distinct lack of what some refer to as superstitious paralysis among the doughboys, unlike that which particularly plagues troops from Eastern Europe's more rural areas. On the other hand, many U.S. soldiers just simply cannot accept that bullets sometimes do not work, and sometimes at the cost of their lives, they seem compelled to at least try shooting everything they don't understand first. There are far fewer cases of whispering heard among U.S. troops than any other force, at least on the surface. Central Powers' intelligence sources suggest that many U.S. soldiers are hesitant to admit when these abilities appear, not due to fears from their military, which, again being practical, has accepted that such individuals exist and may be an asset. Instead, they appear to fear reprisals from within their own units. Several, being a bit too enthusiastic about their newfound abilities, have been found murdered in their billets, with fellow soldiers claiming they must have been killed by the enemy, who snuck past a full guard, sometimes far behind enemy lines, and killed the soldier with U.S. equipment. Far more successful and common appears to be U.S. soldiers being subtler about the use of these newfound abilities, claiming they got lucky or someone was looking out for them. As long as they maintain this subtleness, the troops serving with them are just glad to live to see another day. In addition to these differences, more American units seem to be specifically assigned to hunt down unusual happenings, focused on killing things that are not Central Powers troops, and confiscating and obtaining any materials or information about the sources of these unusual goings-on. Some suspect that, not having suffered the internal damage and direct contact with these strange happenings as the European nations have, the Americans are playing a long game which has nothing to do with which side wins the conflict, but rather what happens to the world afterwards. And there we go. My first spam of the stream. Ba-da-bum-ba. All right. Good to see some spam is at least in the chat. Let's see. These efforts appear to have dampened what may have been, under other circumstances, a tipping point in the war, with the fresh and well-equipped U.S. troops finally breaking the stalemate of the Western Front. Instead, their generals and commanders seem quite content to maintain the status quo while gathering every scrap of information they can find. Interestingly, not a single scrap of this collected material seems to be returned to the United States itself, instead bound for field headquarters and newly established bases in France and England. Additionally, some have noted that not one U.S. soldier or any other personnel have returned from Europe to the United States itself, not even its commanders, not even the wounded or maimed. Ships which have been to Europe are being resupplied at sea, with claims that this is expedient, and except for troops bound for the front or some other post, U.S. transport crews are loath to set foot on European soldier. There have even been several incidents where those who fell overboard in European waters were thrown life preservers or some other aid, and then instructed to swim to shore, or were left to be rescued by others, never again allowed back onto their ships. This appears to be carefully hidden from troops to some degree, but there's growing concern among the doughboys that they may never be allowed home. Well, that's really an intriguing way to look at it. Kind of a sort of a new twist, a spin on U.S. isolationism given the rending of the veil. Hey, Terrence. Glad you can make it. Welcome, welcome. So for the U.S. forces, the themes are hidden agendas, promise of victory, the quote-unquote adventure of going to Europe. Officer attitudes are described as, for most, the whole war in Europe is a mess, the Brits and French badly botched, which now requires U.S. help to clean up. It is a situation they shouldn't have had to deal with, yet here they are. Like an annoyed parent putting children back to bed, America is stepping in with overwhelming force, shouting, "Stop this right now." Not even the top military commanders have been allowed to hear everything known or suspected about the others. And then the soldier attitudes. Americans in Europe are as diverse as the nation they hail from. Some soldiers have political convictions or strong ties to the Allied powers, which drew them into the conflict. Others were drafted. Still others just wanted to see Europe on the government's dime. Most approached the unique problems of this conflict with rehearsed pragmatism. Hey, Juan Cholo. Says Europe, especially Eastern Europe, post-war was as post-apocalyptic as Twilight 2000. Indeed. I'm not sure if you're referring to First World War, Second World War, or both. Probably both. I know that they are still. There was an earlier bit where they said that you're still digging up remains in Europe, and not for nothing, but they're still digging up munitions from both World Wars, but particularly the First World War, because the problem was that in the First World War, they really hadn't nailed down how, optimized munitions to the fact that so much munitions that were launched were duds or they were misfires, and they would just impact into the ground and sit there. And so I believe there are still tracts of fairly large tracts of land in France that are literally off limits because at any time, old World War I shells, some of them filled with chlorine gas and other nastiness, will just rise up out of the soil, and it has to be dealt with very carefully by specialists who have a fairly high mortality rate. And I believe in the book I read, it's a few years old now, but it's just a fascinating bit on that they would go and carefully dig them up and take them out, and they this whole mechanism where they would go out to the North Sea, which has, I guess, a very, very long, their low tide goes out very far. So on low tide, they could go out, they would dig a trench, put all the munitions in the trench, rig it, wait for a high tide to come in and cover it all up, and then blow up the old munitions. Juan Cholo says, First World War in particular, but both could qualify. After World War I, many countries dissolved and new ones were rising and falling, all while fighting each other. This is true. The Austro-Hungarians, and there was that weird kind of Weimar sort of moment for a while before just everything closed in. Yeah, just terrible times. And of course, World War II is really just still part of the throes of World War I anyway. Playing out. Absolutely. Absolutely. On to another Alfred's Journal entry from July 24th, 1916. My days have been spent waiting. I almost wish for fighting. Longval has no residence other than us, so there's no distraction. No whiskey, no girls, no music. Just us and the other battalions who've come at the command of Haig. Haig is here in the town somewhere, they say. I haven't seen him yet. Thomas told us Robertson and Lloyd George are coming from London on Asquith's orders. Thomas knows everything, but he has a big mouth. Sometimes people only tell him things because they know he'll repeat it, so you can never be too sure that what he says is true. It's the weapon, he tells us excitedly. The one they were going to use at the Somme. That's why Robertson and Lloyd George are coming. I don't think that's right, and I tell him as much. There was going to be some new weapon in the Somme. Why did they move us so far from the front? Why haven't we spent these last weeks preparing for an offensive? I can't shake the sight of the Germans running from their own trenches, calling out in horror. And the creature atop our trench that night, or the bones we saw on the march here, they aren't coming to see Haig's new weapon, I say. They're coming to put an end to Haig's madness. What madness? Thomas asks as if he doesn't know, as if he hasn't watched Bailey day after day and wondered. You know everything. I'm surprised you have to ask, I say. He doesn't like that. Whatever dark art the Germans used, we're not using them. Asquith wouldn't stand for it. I give him a meaningful look, and his arguments die. Now we get the Central Powers, the German Empire. As before, I'm going to skip to their response to the Veil. If I can find it. Let's see. On the front lines, the Germans have extremely mixed feelings about those who hear the whispers. Those feelings have a nasty habit of changing with the tides of war. If the German troops feel victorious and that fate is with them, those with their unusual abilities and powers are heralded as avenging angels for the German people. When things go badly, however, they are cursed, blamed, and sometimes killed by their fellow troops. This has led to the Germans organizing those who hear the whispers around hardened veteran units, specifically the stormtroopers. When placed in stormtrooper units, they can be force multipliers, seeding terror through the enemy trenches as their units close in on their true goals. On numerous occasions, Allied forces have found themselves battling some unnameable horror at one location, only to realize their mistake when an ammo dump explodes, a key bridge collapses, or a field headquarters goes up in flames. On the Eastern Front, at least the strange events radiating outward from the Somme appear to have driven Russia into civil war after the communist Bolsheviks took power. The deal with the fledgling Soviet government has given Germany huge territorial gains in the East, and, more importantly, freed up soldiers to check the renewed power of the Allies in the West. This has relieved some of the pressure on Germany, but given its own multitude of problems, it has not been able to take full advantage of new eastern lands. Given the ever-increasing calls for some kind of victory to shore up morale and calculations that the military should now make headway, the pressure for victory in the West is stronger than ever. The whole war effort now looks to hang on repeating all the battles of 4 years ago. The themes are confidence, technological innovation, and commitment to the fatherland. Officer attributes: careful planning and waiting to strike until a moment of advantage are part of German officer training. The country is, by and large, committed to the war, and officers can make plans knowing the best supplies and troop allotments the government can manage will follow. Once supplies, materiel, and transport are all arranged, the actual battles are almost footnotes. All problems are approached this way. Soldier attitudes. The initial enthusiasm for glory of territorial expansion has cooled significantly. Now all that remains is the cold determination to make sure all this was somehow worth it. With so many fellow Germans dead and the Kaiser still asking for more, the soldiers have to believe if they can simply hold on a little longer, they will finally secure what they have all been fighting for. Oh boy, here's a big journal entry. From July 29th, I think that's a 9. 29th, yeah, it's a 9. 29th, 1916. We wait and wait and wait without new orders. We don't see Bailey except in the mornings when he calls roll and distributes rations. Then all day we wait, hiding from the heat in the shade of what is left of the buildings. Then one day we see a car rolling slowly through the streets. That has to be him, William says. That's not him, says John, meaning Haig. It's Robertson. So Thomas was right. But where's Asquith? John snorts at the thought. Asquith isn't going to leave his plush apartments to come here. It's more likely that King George will come again to the front. We follow the car with our eyes down the road. After it's disappeared from view, Thomas gives me a wink and nods his head in the direction we saw it drive. I look at William and John. William's eyes are wide with fright. He's shaking his head no. John simply waves us away, saying bah as he dismisses us. Thomas and I leave them and creep down the road towards the car. We turn the corner and see it ahead, parked outside a field tent. We can hear arguing even this far away. We sneak up the road, careful not to let anyone see that we're moving towards the tent. That's surely where Haig has been hiding with the other officers. As we come up to the backside of the tent, we can make out the voices more clearly. I won't stand for this. Parliament is going mad over the issue. The king is completely out of sorts. You're disobeying direct orders from your superiors. This is unconscionable, Haig. It must be, Robertson. Then, I think as I listen, get these men back to the front. You're wasting time. There's a shuffle of chairs and papers. Sir, I assure you that this is not a waste of time, the general says. The Kaiser's men were already overrun by these things. We just need a little more time before we're ready to, but Robertson cuts him off. Then get back to the front and finish the job. We will not stoop to using the dark arts to win. I looked at Thomas, and he seems to understand then that what I've been saying is true. These monsters might have been summoned by the Germans, but our leaders are also trying to use them. We'll have a tough time convincing the rest of them, sir. Haig's voice has taken on a sinister quality. Who? Robertson burst with impatience. The officers, sir. They hear the whispers of these things and are listening to their words. I fear my only hope now is to sway these creatures to our cause, to gain control of the army again. There was a long pause in which I imagined fear taking root in Robertson as it is taking root in me. General, are you saying that these things have control of my officers? The answer is so quiet. Yes, sir. I see Thomas shift uncomfortably beside me. Then you best get some new officers, General, Robertson says. We hear the flap of the tent open and the car engine firing up. Thomas and I don't talk about what we heard, not on the way back to our place among the rubble, and not after when William questions us. Ah, John says to us, so you know something's not right. Now we all know, he mutters. Oh, waka, waka, waka. Whew. It's heating up. The others have taken control of the officers. Who's running this war? On to Austria-Hungary. As the war dragged on, Austria-Hungary relied increasingly on Germany to fight their multi-front war, first with Russia and Serbia, then later with Italy and Romania. By the end of the war, Austria-Hungary had all but become a German satellite. This sentiment does seem to fit the facts. As Erich Ludendorff, the first quartermaster general of the German General Staff, said, the empire was a, quote, drain on German blood and German war industries, end quote. That Austria-Hungary as a state entity did not survive after the end of the war in 1918 is not a surprise, but it does beg the question, what were they hoping to gain? Was the leadership interested in holding the empire together or in something else? Themes for the Austria-Hungarians: proud traditions, ethnic conflict, resignation to chaotic events. Their officer attitudes. The many ethnic regions of the empire each maintain their own military units. Before the war, these ethnic units were always stationed in a foreign region, so local rebellion was always impossible. Once the war required these different units to work together against larger threats, they found it almost impossible to do so. Many officers, replaced by Germans, have returned to their home regions where many have taken up the fight for independence. And then soldier attitudes. There is more loyalty to officers than to the nation. In the West, Austrian troops are happy to fight with their German cousins. In the more diverse East, there is more resentment of the interference of Germany, and many have given up the war and directed their arms at their imperial masters in the hopes of gaining Allied support for their national independence. Hey, Brian Smith. You did miss some good, weird writing, but there is plenty more, so stay tuned, Brian. But glad to have you here. Another Alfred's Journal entry, this time from July 30th, 1916. They are moving us again, but Bailey doesn't say why. We're going back to the front. It is almost a relief to me. How it can be still amazes me. I can't forget the sound of the general's voice as he admitted that there is another power controlling his army. And then from August 2nd, 1916. We've made it back to the trenches, but we still have a long way to march before we're at the front again. It's worse this time, going back. We don't know what we're headed for. I'd almost be thankful if I was gunned down by the German machine gunners. The officers have started to come in the night, choosing 1 or 2 men from the dugouts. We don't know what happens. None of us has had the courage to follow, but we hear the chanting and we hear the screams. The men come back to us, but they aren't the same afterward. They are hollow, like Bailey. I can't help but think of the Tower of Bones I saw on the way here. How many others might now be set around us as we hide from our own commanders in these holes? Ooh! Hiding from your own commanders. Towers afraid of looming but not visible towers of bone. Yes, sir. And then a wonderful image here of the... It must be in the same image as the cover, basically just I won't say widescreen, but a wider view, pulled back. The soldiers standing in a bright red pool of blood, and their reflections are distinctly different than their images in the real. They're real images. So who knows which is the reflection and which is the real. Very cool stuff. The Ottoman Empire now. Let's see. Let's see. I'm just trying to see how much of the Ottoman stuff to read. Ooh, Juan Cholo. More comments in the chat. The Austro-Hungarian mountain troops were particularly effective in defending the mountain passes from the Italians. I have heard that, Juancholo. Yeah, I've read some of the history. I don't pretend to be an expert, but yeah, it was. They did a lot with a little, I think, because really the Austro-Hungarians were fighting. They were terribly. Just everything was coming apart for them, but I guess local heroism by their forces did a job on the Italians trying to move through those passes. Okay, so let's get back to the Ottomans. I guess I'll just read from the top of this page, since it kind of all seems to be applicable. Previously, the Ottomans relied heavily on German assistance, both in finances and materiel, in training and in leadership. Now, German officers say they are sometimes openly scorned, mocked, and disrespected, and some divisions of Ottomans have been seen on the Western Front for the first time, almost as if a counter to the presence of Americans. Reports from Allied intelligence note that even the Germans and Austrians are disturbed and sometimes surprised by their presence. However, despite all that, desertions within the Ottoman Empire seem to be at an all-time high. Soldiers who, by all accounts, have never been to the front lines have fled, and there are reports in Egypt and across the Mediterranean of haunted refugees from the interior of the Ottoman Empire, from Syria and Iraq and Anatolia, who appear terrorized, frightened, and haunted. Other reports indicate that Enver Pasha has diverted some divisions into the interior of the country in relation to some internal matter, which is a closely held secret. Allied sources among the Bedouin and Kurds suggest that there was some sort of mysterious project that would have solved the transportation of troops across the territories that went badly, very badly. Now people are fleeing the area with only the clothes on their backs and grievous scars and injuries, as if they had been set upon by vicious animals. Whatever this incident is, has helped slow the Ottoman advance down, and religious and political figures who were protesting something occurring within the military have been silenced, imprisoned, and in some cases have died under mysterious circumstances. Now, however, across Europe and the Middle East and parts of Asia, independent Ottoman deserters can be found, spinning wild tales that make those of the mysterious happenings on the Western Front pale in comparison. These deserters, despite their sometimes insane ramblings, seem to have an unusual wealth of knowledge about the supernatural creatures now stalking the war zone, more than just old superstitions or information gleaned from observation. But they sometimes know names, weaknesses, and habits, as though they trained or even worked beside them. They always seem to stop short of going into details, as if they fear reprisals of the most horrible nature. Ooh, so some intriguing stuff there about the Ottomans. The Ottoman themes are cautious optimism, long legacies, fervor. Let's see, Brian Smith says, it's such a good fit, the Eldritch and War, especially from how little knowledge a man on the ground would have of what's going on at the top, much less about the cosmic horrors. Indeed, yep, it is. They do make a good or excellent bedfellows, so to speak. Brian Smith, I totally agree. Officer attitudes for the Ottomans. Officers are sworn into a nearly ancient order, bound, I think there's a missing two, bound to protect the Ottoman Sultan with their lives. Despite the attempts of the Young Turks to push the empire in a more secular direction, the Sultan remains an important religious figure for the vast majority of officers as well. All of Enver Pasha's efforts have borne fruit so far. Loyalty to his military leadership is total. And then soldier attitudes. Given the agrarian nature of so much of the empire, most soldiers are conscripts, extracted from the land as part of the tax on local governors. These troops are drilled to follow orders without questions. Despite this, most soldiers have strong sensibilities which orders can only push so far. The problems in the heart of the empire have not yet reached any of the battle lines, but when they do, the soldiers will make their own decisions about where to point their guns. There's definitely looming troubles for the Ottomans. Juan Cholo says, this setting does remind me of the Call of Cthulhu module, The Lost Battalion, set during World War I about the Lost U.S. Battalion. I hadn't heard, I've heard the story about the Lost U.S. Battalion, but I hadn't heard of the Call of Cthulhu module. But yeah, I think you're going to find that they're definitely mining similar veins, right? They're definitely in the same ground. And you could probably fairly easily port this setting to Call of Cthulhu or fit it in. And I know Call of Cthulhu has some things around this area. I don't. Someone can tell me if they have anything specifically set in World War I. I know somebody mentioned in the last stream that they have, Achtung Cthulhu. I think is what World War II. But yeah, this would be a natural fit for something in the Cthulhu universe. And I'm sure if you wanted to tie it in specifically with the Cthulhu mythos, you could reframe the others as whomever. I don't know a whole lot about the Cthulhu mythos, but, I'm sure there's some being or beings you could equate to the others here. Another Alfred's journal entry. This one dated August 4th, 1916. They took William last night. John, Thomas, and I got the courage to follow them. It wasn't as hard as we thought it might be. They were singularly focused on their dark deeds. They had cleared out a circular area in what was left of the grass above the trench. We saw the general there. Chanting was low. We couldn't make out what they were saying, though if we'd been able to hear, I suspect that it wouldn't have been any language that men speak. We watched as they pushed William into the middle of their circle, where there were carvings in the ground. The chanting continued, each of them holding out their hands toward the sky. What evil gods are they calling down on us? If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I don't think I would believe it. William struggled against the ropes at first, but realizing it was hopeless, he stopped. At least, that is what we thought at first, but then we realized he had stopped struggling only because he was paralyzed with fear. Over his body appeared a tall and ghastly nightmare. His shadowy cape flew out behind him as he appeared in the circle. The monster looking around at the chanters, then down at his feet at William. William crumpled, fainted perhaps, and the tall, shadowy nightmare stepped over him, moving towards the officers who had summoned him. It was too much for John. He stood suddenly, unslung his rifle, and began shooting. One officer went down, then another, before they realized what was happening. "John!" Thomas yelled, trying to pull him down into the trench, to run away from the officers who were now moving fast towards us. "The boy! Alfred! The boy!" I ran forward, dodging the officers one by one until I had reached William. He was white as death. I wasn't sure he was even alive. Over my shoulder I heard shooting, and John calling out. Thomas was shooting now too. I saw the creature watching idly. It didn't move to interfere. I hoisted William onto my back and ran with him toward the trench. The remaining officers were starting to flee. John and Thomas had shot 5 or 6 of them. The creature turned its head to look after the fleeing officers, then looked at the 3 of us mutineers and seemed to shrug. Then it turned and walked away in a new direction. We watched it disappear over the edge of a hill. "What were you thinking?" I snapped. I set William down in the ground. He had regained consciousness but was still too pale. He needed a medic. "Something has to be done," John said. "I'm not following any commander that does these sorts of things," he said as he gestured to the circle. "The noise has drawn a crowd of soldiers, but as they come up out of the trench, they can't make heads or tails about what they see. It comes down to this," John says. "You're either on our side or on their side," again gesturing to the ring where the officers had conjured the creature. "I'm not going back to the front. I'm hunting down the men who brought these monsters upon us. John is right. How can we do anything else? But how do we convince what remains of our regiment to fight our own?" Oh man. Now we're talking. Now we're playing with fire. Juan Cholo says, "I remember one of the players saying, 'We've been shooting soldiers that don't stay dead, spent all night chasing a nutter around through a forest, and now we find polite Frenchmen? Something is very wrong.'" Was it the polite Frenchmen that set them off? Set their spider senses tingling. Oh, I've met plenty of polite French folk. It's all good. But yeah, that's funny. And there's a lot going on. Okay, now we get Bulgaria. Always treated as a junior partner by its allies, Bulgarian forces found themselves doing much of the heaviest fighting, first in Serbia and later against Greek forces, while Austria-Hungary and even more so Germany reaped the rewards. This bred some level of resentment among the Bulgarians and perhaps made their officers all the more susceptible to the whispers. By the time anyone truly questioned the partnerships they had made, Bulgarians found themselves at war with all the Allied powers, virtually dependent on German materiel, and led by a corrupted military establishment. Their themes are revenge, expansion, and outdated methods of fighting. Officer attitudes. The Bulgarian government keeps the military at arm's length due to unclear laws governing the chain of command. Additionally, the conditions of the alliance places Bulgarian forces under the ultimate command of German officers. Upset at their hands being tied from both directions, Bulgarian officers grumble, yet they must make the best of their difficult position. And then soldier attitudes. Military service is compulsory, and the Bulgarian army is larger than average for the size of the country. Soldiers tend to fight fiercely against traditional enemies, often relying on savage hand-to-hand fighting and cavalry. Against armies equipped with modern weaponry, they are far more likely to simply surrender before any real fighting can begin. All right, now we've gone through all the kind of backstory and setup. Now we're getting into the more particular GM referee, I think they call them narrator tools. First thing they bring up is the X card. We recommend you use a safety device such as an X card for all role-playing sessions, especially when playing with people you do not know well. A safety device is ideal for games like Never Going Home because the subject matter is deliberately dark and creepy, dealing with supernatural horror, human cruelty, and the consequences of war. The X card is simply a large letter X on a card or sheet of paper placed where everyone at the table can reach it. If you have a big table, use more than one. One is included in the back of this book for you to copy. That's a good idea. If a player does not want to roleplay a situation, they can simply pick up the X card to signal a halt and play. They don't need to explain themselves, but you, as narrator and the table, generally moves the scene of events or changes the circumstances to remove the unwanted content from your group narrative. It's not a pause button to let someone catch their breath. It is a channel change button to do something else. Role-playing is ultimately a form of entertainment, and keeping the events of the game in the realm of entertainment for all players is part of your role as the narrator. And then they give you a URL where you can read more. And they recommend if you don't want to use that tool, use another tool. Good advice. So we have some kind of, I'm going to skip over some of the general sort of content here. General advice. We have some notes about story over combat. Involvement over happiness. This might be interesting. The game and the setting are dark and foreboding. The goal is not to make players happy with their character's situation and pleased with their range of options. Instead, make sure the players are invested in gameplay and involved in the events of the current mission. Bring the players deeper into the experience by talking directly to their characters. Call them by their names, tell them what they are seeing, ask them what they are feeling. Listen when they talk about their hopes and dreams so you will know how to tailor events and threats to the soldiers trapped in your adventure instead of offering generic haunts. Sometimes it helps to let players decide what is horrible about a situation. Force them to choose what threats they have to face. They know more about their character's own fears than you ever will. I mean, also good points. I think to use that effectively, you really have to make sure your players are invested with the kind of character generation stuff so that they develop these things. Because otherwise, if I just make up Soldier X, I'm not going to have off the top of my head some well-detailed, well-described fears and wants and dreams. Right? I really have to be pushed to kind of think of those things. So you need to make sure that you bake that into your, however you're doing character generation, your session zero stuff, make sure that that's all baked in so that you can get all that material to draw from. Creativity over notes. Though the game is built around working through missions, that does not mean that you must check every box on your list of events. Sometimes you can tell players no, but sometimes you should let them go off and get themselves into unexpected trouble. Players often think of solutions to problems which you didn't anticipate or prepare themselves for threats you didn't plan to use. Reward their creativity when they think of worthy additions to the story. Often following the characters produces results that just as good as or even better than your notes. Yep, I would agree with that. You could change things as you go to bring the adventures back to the story you planned, or you can add additional challenges if they are getting off quote-unquote too easily. Be flexible, but don't let the players push you into letting them complete a mission automatically. Never forget you have the final say on what happens in the world. And then, finally, horror over hope. The world has been broken open by horrors, and there is no sign of things getting better anytime soon. Amid this horror, let the characters have some respite in pockets of normalcy. Offer them hints and rumors of better times ahead and of greener pastures somewhere else. If they quit, you will not be able to keep showing them new horrors. Remind the characters they are trapped in a haunted war zone, stumbling from one disaster to the next. Keep them leaping from the frying pan into the fire over and over again. Every victory must come with a terrible price. Every new dawn must be earned by the terrors of the darkest hours of the night. The cursed outnumber the survivors. Death is a certainty. Whoo! Now we get a telegram dated August 6th, 1916 from William Robertson, London, or to William Robertson, London, rather. Mutiny on the front. Stop. Officers murdered in the night. Stop. Soldiers used as fodder for dark arts. Stop. I told you this would happen. Stop. French allies still unreachable. Stop. Still no fighting at the front. Stop. German transmissions have ceased. Stop. Some soldiers are now following orders from a man named John Hampton, a veteran soldier. Stop. He's hunting us down one by one. Stop. Woo, John Hampton. You the man, John Hampton. Oh, I got another Juan Cholo comment in the chat. The Call of Cthulhu game The Lost Battalion suggested to get the right mood by using candles for light, for snacks using crackers, spam, and water to represent rations. Turn lights on and off during artillery strikes. Man, that's pretty good if you can do it. If you got that, if you have the capability to run that kind of setup, that would definitely be get you into the mood. I like the crackers, spam, and water. I get some hardtack. All right, so we're getting deeper. Oh, man, it seems like I'm already coming up against the bottom of the hour. I'm not sure how much more to the book I have, so I'm going to keep trying to get through this because we're kind of really into the GM tools, of course, which I am hyper interested in. Missions. Never Going Home is played by completing missions, which are small adventures including a setup, a number of events for the characters to interact with, a reward for those characters who survive, and a reward. A single mission lasts for about an hour of playtime but can cover any amount of time in the game. Some missions are entirely self-contained, and some are part of a series telling a larger connected story. Play through as many missions as needed for the length of your gaming session. I think the idea is you could run a mission in an hour. It's a pretty cool concept. I'm curious. I'm sure that the first couple missions you run probably will not be that smooth, or not be that short because they won't be that smooth. But if you can get it down to basically running a mission in about an hour, that's awesome, because then you could really time out. Oh, we got 3 hours, so we can run 3 missions, say 2 missions and an intermission, if you will. Terrence says these segments fit right in one of those creepypasta or SCP reading channels. Yes, they would fit very well in something like that. Each mission has a mission folio divided into 4 main parts. I'm gonna try to I want to sort of get through to other stuff. So the anatomy of the missions doesn't, I don't find super important, or we could rather, if we get to a mission, we could just see it as they come. But we get a mission overview, the journey, which has the incidents in it, and then the decoration, which gives you the hands. Remember, you get cards, new cards added to the player's hands, and then after the mission's over, characters can heal all their attributes. And they can spend cards from acquired during the mission to buy advancements for their characters. And then after advancement, you shuffle all the stuff back in the deck, and then you get ready for the next mission. Corruption is not cleared at the end of missions. Takes a special event during a mission to heal corruption. So you can do all kinds of stuff. A lot of stuff gets reset, but whatever corruption you've picked up during the mission sticks with you until you get to something special. If you get to something special during a mission to get rid of corruption. Now they're breaking down these elements of the mission. So we have the journey. The journey is an event that happens as the first part of each mission. It focuses on role-playing or character moments and helps set the tone for the events to follow. Each journey lists its requirement, i.e. 3 hearts, 1 card of each suit, and some more difficult missions also include things to avoid, i.e. no 6s, no more than 1 spade. The journey requirement is told to players before they contribute cards. Each player must contribute 1 card from their hand to the journey, but they may contribute more if they wish. The player has no cards, add 1 card to the journey from the deck without looking at it. By group consensus, players may elect to take more time on the journey to gather what they need and add additional cards from the deck, but never more cards than the total number of players. Sometimes the narrator may also add cards to the journey for corrupt characters. Players' hands are always secret, so open discussion of who is contributing what card is discouraged. A general discussion of how confident the players are that they can succeed at the journey can be allowed, especially if it is played in character. This is kind of that thing. I don't know if it's come up more in role-playing games, but this is a big kind of board game mechanic. In those games, I forget what they're called, but sort of games that feature traders or potential for traders. Dead of Winter is one that I played a fair amount of times that has this kind of potential trader mechanic. In Dead of Winter, there's a similar thing where you're going through kind of these rounds in the game, I think days or weeks, and you have to gather supplies, all these things. And the supplies in that game, they have their own deck of cards, basically. You're not using suits and colors and that thing. You're saying, oh, we have tools and food and these other things. And now you have your deck of cards, and you will say, oh, you're not supposed to say exactly what you're playing, but you could say, I don't have anything to contribute, or, well, I can contribute a little bit, or I got, we're going to need more, right? You could be general, but the idea is that if you're the trader, you may be wanting this thing to fail, because if these things fail, then you're closer to defeat, which is what you want. Not only that, but sometimes we'd have your own character goals. So you might want to hold back cards, even if they're good, and try to hedge your bets because you're trying to get your own character goal. In any sense, the idea is that you're contributing to this group task, but you're not supposed to. It's kind of cheating in a sense to say, oh, I'm exactly what you're playing, but you can kind of hint at it, but you're trying to leave that leeway because someone might be the trader. So you have to kind of allow, if everyone just said what they were playing, it would be too easy to then suss out if there was a trader. So that's the kind of mechanic that they're going for here, is this potential for somebody essentially lying. So there's some protection mechanically built in, so you can't just out somebody, but of course you can be suspicious and try to suss things out in different ways. But there's always supposed to be that open question, so that when you, in this case, at the end of the journey, you flip over and things aren't kind of what people thought they were, you might try to figure out, like, hey, wait a minute, you said you could contribute a bunch and you didn't, or you said something, or like, you sure you played a card, or, however that is. It's definitely an interesting way of doing things. And I feel like role-playing games like that, it's a good way of doing it. You have all this card mechanic already. Using this kind of mechanic with that kind of, it makes total sense. And it's a good one, especially if you're going to have a situation where you're going to have people who are potentially lying as a trader, whatever, for their own goals. Cool. Juan Cholo says, Dead of Winter, the game of hard choices. Indeed. I really like Dead of Winter. I got to play it a handful of times a few years ago. It's a lot of fun. I like the fact that there was the potential that there could not be a trader. It wasn't necessarily that you're always going to be a trader, but there was sometimes you could. And that was part of that calculus you're trying to figure out is there a trader at all? And if so, who it is? And then, of course, with the personal goals, muddied the waters even more, because you might have a goal like at the end of the game, you need to have 10 food yourself. So then as you're going on with these goals, you're trying to hold back food so that you can have it for yourself. But then maybe that leads to things, you're playing it close with these missions. And then, of course, people might think, well, are you the trader, or is it your own goal? And everyone's kind of doing that same thing with their own stuff. So a lot of fun. A lot of fun. All right, let's see. Once the cards have been contributed to the journey, the narrator shuffles them and deals them out face down to the players. If there are more cards than there are players, the narrator may deal themselves a journey card as well. These cards should not be added to the player's hands. Anyone may start. One at a time, the players reveal their journey card and either answer the question posed by the journey in the voice of their character or narrate a scene, what their character does during the journey. When the narrator reveals a card, they tell which character the thoughts they describe occur to or who is involved in the scene they narrate. All answers and narrations should be inspired by the themes of the revealed card's suit, with higher numbers being more intense, if appropriate. The scenes can involve roleplay with another character at the table. Each answer or scene should last for about 1 minute. So this is really kind of a cool idea. So you've gathered all these cards together, and then you reveal them, and then depending on what card you get, you are supposed to kind of really do kind of improv out a little bit of what's happened. I hope we'll get to some examples, because it'd be neat to see kind of what they're imagining for this. But it seems pretty cool. It has that, you get kind of some of that kind of story game vibe, but it's sort of in a sense where it's not necessarily impinging on the rest, right? It's these little moments. You're kind of moving to the area where I assume where the adventure is taking place. You were at the regional battalion headquarters, and now you're moving to the front. And what are these things that happen on your way there? And helps kind of build up. The players get to have some ownership over it, and they're building up all the stuff. From the DM's point, or the narrator's point, it's kind of cool, because they're going to be giving you all kinds of stuff. You don't have to come up with it all yourself. They're going to be saying what it is, and then it gives you all these things you'll be able to plug in to what happens later on. Juan Cholo says, in one Dead of Winter game, someone accidentally put down the wrong card. Everyone thought there was a traitor, and 2 people were exiled before we realized the mistake. We all felt pretty bad about that. Yep. Exiling the wrong person is. I mean, it can be kind of I don't want to say a mean-spirited game, but that is one issue. I think you have to have people who are definitely okay with that, because you can get exiled. People can kind of gang up on you a little bit. They feel you're the traitor. And at some point, if people feel you're the traitor, even if you're not, it's kind of impossible to argue, because, the traitor, of course, is going to argue in their defense anyway. And it's hard to explain things sometimes, because you're really not supposed to give away your goals and things. So you can only kind of generally argue about, how many tools you had, or why you only contributed 1 food. And then it turned out the next turn when you spent 3 food that you had more food, that sort of thing. All cards contributed to the journey are put in the discard pile. If a joker was played, shuffle the deck as normal, and then draw for corruption first. All right, so difficulty can float. Some missions not list a target number. All right, I'm kind of gonna blow through that a little bit. Ooh, mobs of antagonists. In the statistics for each antagonist is a listing for mob or solo type antagonists. Several antagonists with the mob trait can pool their attacks and abilities when appropriate to attack a PC or complete a task. This is the same as PCs completing a challenge. For example, a player character with Brawn 6 with a Brawn of 6 is impossible for a common soldier to hit with a ranged attack, and even a PC with a Brawn of 4 is difficult for such an antagonist. To make groups of enemy soldiers or monsters more threatening, they can act as one. If 4 common soldiers attack the PC with 4 Brawn, they would only need to roll 1 success each. So when they pool the successes together, as a mob, they have enough to hit the PC. Only one antagonist weapon will actually deal damage as a result of the antagonists, as the rest of the antagonists are effective, creating the suppressing fire, which allows one antagonist to hit. Even a tough character can be threatened by a large group of enemies. All right, that's cool. I like that. It's a good thing to have, the kind of mob rules, because there's nothing, especially in a game like this, you don't want players to be in a position where they can feel above the danger. Antagonists with whispers. Some antagonists can cast whispers. Casting a whisper is generally the same for antagonists as it is for player characters. If the whisper path requires the caster to take damage or make skill rolls, they must take that damage or make that roll. If the path requires a discarded card, the narrator does not have to pay this cost, as the narrator does not have a hand of cards. The antagonists using whispers are generally already fully corrupted and no longer limited by the memories of their humanity. All right, Alfred's journal from August 7th, 1916. John has amassed an army of his own. They come from everywhere once they hear the news. We're hiding in Deville Woods, but we're easy enough to find for those who know we're here. We have some Anzacs and some Canadians, French too. We even have a few Germans in our band. We'll take anyone as long as they want to fight the ones who brought the creatures into the world. The Germans, Rainer, Frederick, and Josef, tell us about the night after the first day at the Somme. They saw it happen right in front of them. Their commander had discovered a tablet with ancient runes and had employed mystics and sorcerers to decipher the meaning after their own archaeologists and translators failed to determine the origin. The tablet was a spell. The flash of light was the thinning of the veil that keeps them hidden from our world. We are all amazed by this. It fills John with fury. He's determined to wipe them out, and the men who brought them here. But I don't understand, says Thomas. Why do these creatures care about the war? They don't, Rainer tells us. They are quite indifferent to our struggles. William is better thanks to our medics, but he still isn't well. I go to see him after I eat a supper of hard bread and cold meat. He's sitting up in our makeshift field hospital. He's still too pale, and his eyes have gone dark. What's worse, he stinks the way Bailey stank, and there are flies buzzing around him constantly. It turns my stomach, what they did to him. We can't undo it. Alfred, he says, catching my arm as I approach him. I don't know how much longer I can fight them. I shake my head. Get well, I tell him. Don't think about fighting. But he shakes his head. No, you don't understand, he says. I can't fight them. The whispers. He taps the side of his head with his finger. August 8th, 1916. Men continue to find us in the woods. They bring supplies and rations, but we'll soon be hungry. We must move, but there's nowhere to go. August 12th, 1916. We are continually afraid of the noises we hear in the night. The men who summon the monsters are still contacting them, bringing more of them into the world. And what's worse, the men who are coming to us now tell us that the officers and what's left of their army has learned how to use the magic that the things brought with them. This unsettles John. He decides we must return to Longval and capture the field office. It's risky, but aren't we used to it? August 15th, 1916. We are nearing Longval. We move during the day and hide at night. We must wear our masks all the time now. If we don't, the flies that continually swarm will drive us mad. They are much worse here than in the woods, and we never know when the gas will come. It's a new kind of gas. We don't know what it does exactly, but anyone that gets into it starts to deteriorate, like a doll left outside too long. We don't know who can possibly be sending the gas. It's not coming from shells. It sneaks up on us unannounced, and there are never any soldiers following behind it. Oh, man, oh, man. All right, so we have some stuff about corruption. With the veil torn and otherworldly threats walking the earth, mere humans cannot help but fall victim to the influence of these powerful others. That influence is measured in corruption. Specific mission incidents, antagonist abilities, and whisper effects may force a draw for corruption. Additionally, learning additional whispers causes corruption. A character draws each time they earn the 3rd, 4th, and 5th point of training in each whisper path. Each time a character must draw for corruption, they take the top card of the deck. If it is a joker, they reveal it and must draw again. First, shuffle the deck, discarding the revealed joker as normal. Once the player draws a non-joker card, that character has a 50% chance of corruption. If the card is red, they do not gain a point of corruption. If it is black, they do gain 1 corruption. All right. You use the player character's corruption against them in several ways. First, when they contribute cards to the journey, you may add 1 additional card for each character with 3 corruption and 2 for each character with 4 corruption. Additional cards mean you give yourself cards during the resolution of the journey. You can use these to represent additional hardships the characters face, or especially tough questions they must wrestle with. You can confront these players already corrupted with disturbing images, or you can represent the others attempting to influence those who have yet to be corrupted. There can be incidents which play out differently depending on how much corruption they have. There are also antagonists with attack priorities tied to corruption. The current level of corruption of any character is technically a secret, but sometimes it helps to sow discord in the group by allowing events to suggest who's already walking in the shadow of the others. Interesting that I like the idea that there might be enemies that will actively seek out the folks who are the most corrupted. There are no requirements of how players must play once they are carrying corruption. As narrator, you can nudge them in certain ways in how you describe what they see, and in what you tell them enters their mind when the journey uses a question. Other than this, it's up to the individual players to decide how they play their characters dealing with corruption. They may try to prove they are not under the influence of others by trying to be extra helpful to their peers. Perhaps they will feel they are already a failure and volunteer for dangerous assignments to atone or to punish themselves. They may choose to embrace their descent into madness with increasing selfishness and debauchery, which threatens the unit. Confusion should reign, because any of these responses could be thoroughly human responses to the situation and the situation the soldiers find themselves in. When a character reaches 5 corruption, they are on their last mission. At the end of the current mission, unless they happen to find a way to clear some of their corruption, they do not return to base with the rest of the unit. Instead, the character has given themselves up to the others and wanders off to join them. They may appear later as one of the disfigured, or as some other narrator-controlled antagonist, but the player must create a new character. Those moments between realizing this is their last operation and the actual end of the mission should be a culmination of the road the character was on over the course of their corruption. Will they turn on the rest of the unit? Will they try to destroy themselves rather than heed the others' call? The choices are up to the player, but as narrator, you can help them decide what is best for their character and the overall story. Sometimes some dramatic revelation is appropriate. Other times, simply disappearing from the embrace of human company is the most dramatic way for a character to exit the game. Cool. I like it. It reminds me of the finale of season 2 of, what was that show? Oh, it was so good. It was a spinoff of the X-Files. Not a spinoff necessarily. Millennium. Show Millennium. It was by what's his name did the X-Files, and the first season was okay. And then the second season, I forget the guy's name who created the X-Files. Basically, was going off to do the X-Files movie. So we let the kind of other folks take over the show, and the show was just amazing. That second season of Millennium, I'll put that up against any season of TV, and it had this incredible season finale, which I think at one point the guy's wife or somebody just kind of walked off into the woods. It was just amazing, and then they just totally blew it. I was never so excited for a season premiere as I was for Millennium Season 3, and then I was never so let down as they totally decided to just blow it up and pretty much act like that whole season never happened and do kind of a hard reset back to being sort of X-Files 2. Man, it was such a bummer, but I love that. Shout out to Millennium Season 2. Lance Henriksen as Frank Black. Amazing. When a player character reaches 0 ranks in any attribute, they are dead. There's no way to bring them back with medical care nor magical healing. The body may arise again as one of the unfallen, but the player will need to create another character from scratch to continue playing. They use the normal character creation rules. The only thing you as narrator must decide is when the new character can step into the story. All right, that's kind of standardy stuff. Is that? Oh, we still got more stuff. Boy, I feel I'm going over. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to end it here with these 2 telegrams, and we'll have to. I was hoping I could get through everything left in part 2, but it looks like we will have to have a part 3 so we can go over the antagonists and stuff. Let's just read these 2 telegrams, and then I will call it a stream. First one dated August 16, 1916, to William Robertson in London. The Somme abandoned. Stop. Taking refugee in Albert. Stop. Made contact with Joffre. Stop. French soldiers also deserting. Stop. No word from the east. Stop. Intel says Russians on the retreat. Stop. Pierce won't send any relief from Australia and New Zealand until this mess is under control. Stop. Who are we even fighting? Stop. And then the second one dated August 16th, 1916 to Douglas Haig in Albert. Joffre is raving like a madman. Stop. What have your sorcerers unleashed on us? Stop. If you can't get the army under control, get yourself out of there. Stop. Parliament and the king have agreed. Stop. Until we resolve the matter of these monsters, we won't fight the Germans. All right. And then we're given some resources. Books, film and TV, websites, etc. And then part 3. Oh, they also some hardcore history, Blueprint for Armageddon by Dan Carlin. And then World War I by Epic History TV on YouTube. I guess I'll do these 2 Alfred's journals. That way I'll be cleanly on the antagonist section for the third part. His first entry from August 17th, 1916. Tomorrow we strike. We've spent the first part of the night refilling guns and fortifying our defensive structures. We can see Longval on the horizon. I'm sure they know we are here. Thomas and I are nervous. Poor William seems not to know what's happening around him. And John, stoic and stiff as ever. August 18th, 1916. To our great surprise, Longval was empty. Most of the equipment needed for a field office has been left behind. We seize it for ourselves. As we look around, we start to notice signs of sorcery. They have left markings on trees and boards. They have left circles on the ground. There are piles of bones behind the field tent where Thomas and I spied on Haig and Robertson. Thomas and I entered the tent, trying to make sense of it all. There are papers scattered everywhere, maps and telegrams and handwritten notes and manuscripts. While we're poking through the stacks of papers, the telegraph starts buzzing. I pick up the headset and hear the series of beeps coming across the line. Get Reiner, I tell Thomas. Thomas runs from the tent and returns a few minutes later. Reiner sits down at the telegraph, taking the one and a paper I've found. He writes furiously as the message comes across the wire. After a few minutes, he pauses and takes off the headset. That's it, he says. Just the same words over and over. He hands me the paper and I read it aloud. Lock, book, bear, wood, moon, tide, tree. What is this? I look at Rayner, who simply shrugs. Then Thomas, who shakes his head. A code, he asks? I don't know. I fold the paper and put it in my pocket. Bum, bum, pum. What a way to end it. Lock, book, bear, wood, moon, tide, tree. All right, folks. Looks like I will be getting into antagonists in part 3. You can just look at that page as a bit of a teaser on your way out. If you could give a thumbs up to the stream, I'd appreciate it very much. If you found yourself in here and not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Helps me out. Doesn't hurt anybody. Otherwise, Have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. I'm looking forward to more of Never Going Home soon. Hopefully wrap it up just so I can get it wrapped up in a reasonable amount of time, since we'll be on hour 3, actually hour 3 plus, but it's been good. It's been great. Been enjoying it. Juan Cholo says the movie Death Watch from 2002 with Andy Serkis is a good World War I horror movie to watch for mood/ideas. Ooh, I'll have to look that one up. I have not seen that one. All right, everybody. On that note, watch Death Watch, and I will talk to you later. Game on, everybody.